Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I'm Brian Nemhauser, and it's a Blue Friday here in Seattle. In fact, I think it's going to be a decent weather day, and both Mike and I might get out and hit some golf balls. I don't know. We'll see. And then the Seahawks will be hosting the Saints on Sunday, and it is a huge, huge stretch of games for the NFC West, and we're going to talk all about that with Mike Sando of The Athletic, the best in the biz, man. Good to talk to you. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Yeah, thanks for going early today. There will be a few golf balls hit today, hopefully well. So I'll let you know.
Yeah, at least a few. At least a
A few.
few. So Mike, before we get into kind of specifics of the NFC West, let's zoom out. You know, it's only 2 weeks. So there's not a lot to make from this, but what are your general impressions so far? What teams have gotten your attention, both in the positive and maybe in the negative so far?
Well, you mean just league wide?
League wide, yeah. Just
So,
what your
so
overall thing.
yeah, there were two teams that remember before the year I pulled whatever 8 executives and we ranked the division, the conferences 1 to 16, and then really within that there were kind of some tiers and surprisingly tiers that I would notice tiers, but um, I thought of the sort of mid-range teams. There was one in each conference that that were maybe underrated, and I think Seattle was one in the NFC, and I think Indy was the other one. And I think
Mm,
both of them got undervalued because of quarterback decisions they made that were possibly better than people realized. Okay, because in the Colts case, Daniel Jones is a huge improvement from Anthony Richardson. They really can't run an offense with Anthony Richardson. And so it was very frustrating. I think their team actually doesn't totally suck. And now they've added Tyler Warren, who's been, probably even better than I anticipated in terms of the fit there. I don't think Daniel Jones is playing great ball or is on fire, or he still doesn't have the consistent accuracy. You can still find, balls sailing over the heads of people, but they're able to run the offense. And so I think that's definitely been one team that I think may win that division.
mm.
uh, Now, Daniel Jones is still prone to taking some hits and could get hurt. So, he's taken a couple on scrambles where he didn't have great awareness and got blasted. So he's still Daniel Jones, and that's still risky. But if you look at the rest of that division, why not a team like Indy that can at least now run its offense, and they're going to regress. I mean, look, their offense right now statistically is like second to the '04 Colts among all Colts offenses since like 2000. So that ain't happening. But they've been better. And then I think Seattle, really did not impress in the first game. Was very disappointing, but I think has been good on the lines of scrimmage this year. And you could see a path for them. They got to win a home game every once in a while. They can't have another lose to the Saints like they did to the Giants last year. That's where they
Uh-huh.
were. This is
Uh-huh.
I think that's kind of one of the reasons Mike McDonald's been so, hitting in pads and stuff. I saw you write about that. So not leaving anything to chance. But I think those were a couple of teams. I think Dallas was another mid team that I thought was definitely underrated. So those would be of the team. We all know the teams that we're impressed by, that have the best records, or we thought they were going to be good coming in. But those were just some kind of mid teams that I thought had a chance to do something and are.
Yeah, those are great call outs. And I think it's interesting about the quarterback thing. The Colts are kind of the inverse of the Falcons, right? They spend a high draft pick on a quarterback and then they spend a decent amount of money afterwards on a free agent quarterback. And the higher draft pick doesn't pan out, at least initially, and the free agent ends up being their savior. So uh Seahawks fans don't need any reminders that Daniel Jones can be good enough to beat you, as he did last year. And he's going to factor in. We're going to talk about that here as we go through the NFC West in the next few weeks. That Colts game for almost every NFC West team was like W. I don't know if you can look at that game anymore and just pencil in a W.
Well, even if we look at last year, the Colts were 8-9.
Mm-hmm.
They are one of these teams that is always sort of finds their way to relevance somehow. And some of it's that division that they play in. But I think if you give them just lower mid quarterback play, which is what Daniel Jones probably is on a decent team, lower mid, right? I mean, he's a low tier 3 probably. Well, you can you can be 9-8. You can beat a team. You can beat a team like Seattle, right? You can.
Hmm. Well, and some of the other teams that I'd bring up, add to your list that kind of on the other side that have kind of surprised in the negative, I would say. The Vikings, there was question mark about the quarterback situation and how that was going to look because it seemed like a team that had everything but that. JJ McCarthy's hurt now, but he has been pretty unplayable for almost every quarter so far. The Bears, who again, everyone was like, oh, they make trade for Joe Tooney, they like bring in Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen. It looks like again the quarterback might be a player that's holding them back. And then I'm interested in what you make of the Chiefs.
Mm-hmm.
Like, have we seen like is this team gonna really challenge for their division, or has that really baton been passed? Again, just 2 weeks. Sure seems like the Chargers
Yeah.
are a measurably better team.
Yeah, I think the Chiefs will be in a real fight for it. I mean, they have to go whatever, they have to go 10-5 the rest of the way just to get to 10-7, right? I mean, that's uh winning 2/3. I think they have been a team like I have some confidence in their ability to get better over the course of a season through their coaching and then, hopefully for them to get a couple of their receivers back. But, through those processes in the past, they were able to win the games anyway along the way, right? And we knew that whatever they were 11-0 in one-score games, we know that's going to regress, and it has. And I think that the problem with hoping that Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy are going to come back, those were their injured receivers, is that those guys were lower in the draft because of availability concerns anyway. You're sort of getting what you pay for. And if you really look at their left tackle they drafted in the first round, another sort of risky guy who had a knee injury, right? And he looks good. They may have solved their left tackle thing. But the receiver issue, I think, is real. I just don't think they have a guy now that Travis Kelce is diminished who they can just hang their hat on. So you're really left with if you look at their three guys that were huge differentiators, it was really Kelsey, Chris Jones, and Mahomes. I think Mahomes still is, but Mahomes is now on pace for 1,000 yards rushing because he's trying to do too much.
Uh-huh.
And in the past, they had enough still to kind of do that. But I think it's caught up to them against probably a decent schedule to start the season. They easily could have had this type of a start last year. Remember, they barely beat the Ravens in the first game when the Ravens stepped out of bounds on the last play or late in the game on a when it could have gone the other way. So some of that stuff's evening out, and their margin for error may be small enough that if they go 500 in those one-score games, or even if they go 8-3 instead of 11-0, well, you may not win the division now,
Yeah.
and they've already lost to the Chargers. So look, none of us is going to just write off the Chiefs, but there's good teams in that conference and even in their own division.
Yeah. Well, speaking of good teams, the NFC West has beaten every team that they've played outside of the NFC West. The only loss so far is the Seahawks, unfortunately for Seahawks fans, to another NFC West team in the 49ers in the first game of the season. And so now things get particularly interesting, Mike. You get the Cardinals playing in San Francisco this week. You've got the Seahawks, the home game against the Saints, and you get the Rams going to the Eagles, right?
Yep.
And I'm curious, like I'm going to go over each of their next couple of games and schedule in a second. But I'm curious, like what your take is. I mean, obviously, you wrote a great article last year about the NFC North being like
Yeah.
historically great division. I don't know if we're there yet after 2 weeks, but are you seeing signs that this division may be like the tougher one in the NFC, like it used to be?
I think it's too early to say that when the wins are against the Saints twice, the Titans, the Panthers, and then yes, okay, at Pittsburgh, and then home for the Rams against Houston, which could be one of those disappointing teams as well. I think we really need to see it against the Rams. They don't have to beat the Eagles, but the Rams go toe to toe in Philadelphia, and they're leading for part of the game, and you're like, dang, the Rams are real, I think that's what we need to see. I think who they've played so far, it's good that they didn't lose to them, but I should even look and see what the point spread was. They were, yeah, they were all favored. The only NFC West team that won a non-division game where they weren't favored was the Seahawks at Pittsburgh. So, I think the level of competition is a big thing. And the other thing too is like the 49ers are kind of on fumes. They're 2-0, but I mean they're not playing with their quarterback. George Kittle's out. Is anybody thinking the 49ers right now are going to make a push, a deep push? Does anyone really think Arizona is going to, have a chance at the NFC Championship game? I don't.
Mm.
So I think some of these things will even out over the course of the year for the West.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, and I think who they play is a really good jumping off point to talk about who they played versus who they're
Yeah.
going to play. So the Rams, you talked about that. And I'm in this funny spot, Mike. I posted yesterday that I think that the Eagles are going to be in trouble against the Rams. And the reason
Yeah.
I feel that way is I look at the Eagles. I think that defense is not what it was last year. You wrote a good article on The Athletic about kind of how they've gone young there, but you don't have the pass rush with Josh Sweat and Milton Williams. I just don't see it being nearly as productive as it was a year ago. And the secondary, Adoree Jackson is a pickable guy. Like he's a guy you can pick on. And now you've got Devontae Adams, Puka Nacua, and the bet that the Rams have made with Devontae Adams seems like it's working. So I see the Rams, and Matt Stafford's playing excellent football. So
Yep.
I kind of see the Rams as having an edge there. And I've got all these Eagles fans, yelling at me, like, what are you talking? Did you see the games last year? I'm like, look, guys, I'd be thrilled if you do the same thing. But I think that's a game I honestly give the Rams a bit of an edge. And I'll give you a chance because I know you've thought about that
Yeah.
game. But then it goes at Eagles versus the Colts at home, who we just talked about, versus the 49ers at home on 4 days rest, Thursday night, and then at the Ravens. So these next 4 games for the Rams, pretty going to tell us a lot about that
Yeah.
team.
I think they're a good team. I do. Now, they gave up over 200 yards rushing in each game to Saquon Barkley last year when they played Philly. So I think they're really set up well to rush the passer. But what do we know about their run defense? They played, Houston without Joe Mixon, who can't run the ball. So I would like to see that in this game. Like that would be a telling thing. And Saquon's only averaging about 3.7 a carry this year. He hasn't had the breakout game. And if it doesn't come against the Rams, I think that's a great sign. If he has a 200-yard game, the Eagles may win. So that's been a huge problem for the Rams. And I don't know how great their run defense is. I think we'll really find out this week because the Eagles. I think that's one thing the Eagles can do, right? Run the ball, and they had whatever seven tush pushes last week.
Yes. Yeah. One of the things I should have taken video of it, but everyone's been making this big deal about the Eagles are being offsides on the tush push, and the NFL never calls it. Well, I was watching the Saints play the Cardinals replay, and the officials called it on the Saints. They called offsides on a tush push for the Saints. So
How
it has
about
been called.
Andy Reid was so mad that, like, did you see? I don't know if Schefter, one of those guys, reported like it's going to be called very tightly this week. It's going to be called tightly this week. You could just see Andy Reid, like, long time guy in the league, and you could tell he bit his tongue. He didn't say a ton, but how he was feeling about that. So yeah, I think the memo went out, and we'll see.
Well,
Maybe they get called.
and the other thing with the Rams, Braden Fisk might not play. He's been banged up. You've got Akella Witherspoon, their top corner, who's on IR now and going to be out for a while. So there's some questions. The defense continues, and it's interesting to me. I thought Jared Verse, honestly, I thought he'd be 5 sacks through 2 games. I thought he would just like blow things away. He's got no sacks so far. He's got pressures, but last year I thought all the pressures would, even though he only had 4.5 sacks, I thought that it was just clear that they were going to turn into sack production. So far through 2 games, that hasn't happened. And to your point, it's not like they've been playing. The Texans and Titans offensive lines are not exactly murderer's row of pass protectors. So that's a little surprising.
It is a little bit, but also he's not sneaking up on anyone this year. So I haven't watched the Jared Verse, all of his plays to see what type of attention he's getting, but I guarantee it's more attention than he was getting last year. It's hard.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so then we'll look at the Cardinals, and Mike, the Cardinals, yeah, they played the Saints and the Panthers in 2 close games. So that's the bad news. The good news is I think their defense has looked better. And that's allowed Kyler Murray to not have to be great, which he hasn't been.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now they go at the 49ers. But if they can find a way to beat this 49ers team, then they host the Seahawks at home on Thursday night. If somehow they can win those 2 games and be at 4-0 and 2-0 in the division, then you're talking about they got the Titans, I guess they go to the Colts, they got the Packers. So there are some tough games coming up for them, but this is a pretty key stretch to determine whether they are just the same old Cardinals.
I think the key stretch for them is the second half of the year, because we've seen them start fast with Kyler Murray multiple times, and they can never sustain it over the course of the year. And that gets to, his size, and also what we've learned about his mindset, right? Is he one of those grinders who can really put together a consistent season start to finish? Hasn't been able to do so to this point in the season. I'm glad I don't have any kind of a parlay bet that the Cardinals win their next 2, because I think they'll be, 1-1 would be great for them in that situation. The 49ers is a little bit of a wild card game without Brock Purdy, but I think and they've played the 49ers tough. They've played the 49ers pretty good, as I recall. So as many as you can get in the bank early is important, but for Arizona, they have shown they can lose a lead.
That is true, and they also have lost, most of their starting cornerback. Garrett Williams goes on IR. They put, it looks like Will Johnson probably won't play this week. He hasn't practiced yet, and then Max Melton has been limited. I mean, I don't think I've seen 3 starting cornerbacks go down for a team in one game.
For a team that has been troubled at that position, I don't know if you tweeted or somebody did. It was like a list of like 7 people in their secondary that there was a concern with, or something like that. I was like, oh my gosh, that's a really tough deal. Now they're not getting the high weaponry 49ers right now, but still, that's super concerning. And there is a breaking point for teams. And like you said, they've played Spencer Rattler and Bryce Young so far this season. So, I think Mac Jones might be a step up from that.
Yeah, well, and the interesting thing there is, I mean, they already, before the season started, they lost Sean Murphy-Bunting and Star Thomas, who were their cornerbacks that had some veteran experience. And I thought they had all this like young depth. And now they're going to see Denzel Burke and Elijah Jones and whoever else they throw out there. Going to be one to watch there. So, 49ers. Now, this is an interesting one. And I was interested in your comments about like where they're at. So they're going to host the Cardinals. Then they're going to host the Jags. And I don't know what to make of the Jags, right? I just generally don't take them seriously until they do something. But so then they host the Jags and they go to the Rams, to the Bucks. And then they come back and host the Falcons. So, it feels like it's not implausible, maybe even likely, that they will be 4-0 when they face the Rams, beating the Cardinals, beating the Jags at home. And then they'll have that Rams game. That's a Thursday night game. So I guess, what are your thoughts on that team?
I think that could, for them, getting wins in the bank early, and especially that Seattle win. I think it bodes really well for them, because I do think they're the sort of team that could be better later in the year if Purdy's healthier and Kittle comes back and those types of things. I think they have a chance. Now, they're always rolling the dice with Christian McCaffrey, and so far that scare of the calf that we were talking about a couple of weeks ago hasn't been a big deal. But they're a McCaffrey injury away, which you figure he's not going to play the whole season, from looking very different. So they're tenuous, but I think their defense has been, they've shown that they might have a second pass rusher in the guy they drafted, possibly. And they've talked about that. Kyle Shanahan said, hey, look, we've closed the last couple of games. We've made the big play on defense to close it out. So you got to give them some credit for that. But to me, the wins in the bank early for them would be huge. If they could be 4-0, would be huge for them, because they only won 6 games last year. They're clearly rocked right now, and not themselves, but maybe better later.
Yeah, I mean, you have to think about Brandon Ayuk coming back, and some of the other guys. Maybe Juwan Jennings gets a little healthier, but and they'll get Demarcus Robinson back, I think, this week from, I think he was suspended for 2 games to start the year. I can't remember what his suspension was. I think it was 2 games. So I look at the 49ers, and coming into the season, my biggest question marks were, can they defend the run? Because they couldn't last year, and I didn't think they did necessarily enough. And was
Yep.
their defense going to be better to where the offense didn't have to be all world? And obviously the injuries just all around. Defense has been
Yes.
pretty good, Mike. Like I've like give Robert Saleh credit. I think he's done a really nice job. And then Mykel Williams, their draft pick, has been really stout against the run and had some pass rush. I think Upton Stout, their nickel corner, has
Yeah.
been picked on a little bit, but I think has done relatively well. And then Marcus Siegel, safety, has come in and started and been a plus player. And now they lose Ben Barch, their left guard. He goes on IR. But guess what? 7th round pick Connor Colby has been a pleasant surprise for them. And it was a little annoying since it's a guy that I talked about in pre-draft coverage for the Seahawks. But okay, they did that with Dominic Pooney too, and that went pretty well for them. So yeah, I guess I look at this and I say, I think Brock Purdy, in the one game he played, he was the reason that they won that game. I know Nick Bosa made the play at the end, but there's just no way they win that game with anyone else at quarterback on that roster.
Yes. I also think that, their first 2 games, I mean, let's just face it, Seattle was abysmal offensively in their approach in the first game.
Yes.
If they played that game again, I would think the Seahawks would be a bit more representative. And the Saints everyone had the Saints as the worst team in the league, and they may be a little bit better than that, but they're not better than a bottom 5 team in the league. And it wasn't like their defense just completely, shut them out. I believe it's misleading, but I think Spencer Rattler had 3 touchdowns and no interceptions. Is that correct? I think he
played
did.
well. He played well. They had the ball at the end of the game with a chance to win, and guess what?
Yeah.
A strip sack again
Yeah.
by the
So
49ers ended the game.
So the defensive, look, their defense hasn't been atrocious, 49ers in the first 2 games. I don't know how well it's been tested either, by who they played and how Seattle played in the first game. So I think there's still a lot of question marks with them, and they're probably fortunate to be 2-0.
Well, so then let's talk about the Seahawks. Seahawks are the only team with a loss in the division, and
Yep.
but as you said, the only team with a win when an underdog, and a road underdog at that, against a Steelers team that was kind of flying high after the first week. Feel like they got exposed a little bit in this game.
Totally.
And I would not want to be a Steelers fan. That could be a rough road this year. I think it might be Mike Tomlin's last ride. Curious your thoughts on that.
Really?
But Saints this weekend, then they travel for a short week at the Cardinals on a Thursday night game. And then they get a mini bye week, and then they get the Buccaneers at home, who are now missing like almost their entire offensive line. They lost Kalijah Cansey. That game suddenly feels a little different than it did even just a few days ago. What's your take there?
I think the Tampa game will still be difficult. It will be disappointing for this team if they don't win their next 2 games, in my opinion. I mean, obviously the Saint game, you've got to win that at home. You have to. I mean, if they lose that game, it's just you're squandering away a playoff berth, or you're squandering away seeding. That's just ridiculous. So I think they will win that game, and I think they'll probably win the Arizona game. So I think 3-1 would be a great place for them to be after the uncertainties that crept in after the first game, right? So I like the gains they made week to week. I felt they were much better in the second game, and maybe the first game was a little bit of an aberration for them, but they've got to prove it. They've got to put a couple together, and I think they probably will. I think they get the next couple games, and then Tampa could go either way.
Well, and the interesting thing there, Mike, is let's play the game where let's assume somehow they get the 3 wins: Saints, Cardinals, and then home against the Bucks. They'd be 4-1 at that point.
Yeah.
And then you'd be going to the Jaguars, which again, we don't exactly know who they are. Home against the Texans, not the game that I thought even it might be. The defense, I mean, everyone talks about the offensive line. I feel like the defense got abused a little bit by Baker Mayfield, in spite of having very few offensive linemen to go up against what's supposed to be a dominant pass rushing team. And a great secondary. And then the Commanders at Washington, like we'll find out what's going to go on with Jaden Daniels, but that I'm not sure that team is stepped forward. It might have stepped backwards.
Yes, and so the schedule as you're looking at the Seahawks hasn't swung. You kind of look at it before the year, and then it could look harder or easier after a couple weeks, right? And you'd say it looks a little
Exactly.
easier. I think you could say it looks a little bit easier. Houston, eh, that may tell us something about Tampa, though. See, I think Tampa's a good team,
Hmm.
and they've proven it year after year to be kind of a playoff team, even though it's in that division. They've played teams tough. They've played good teams tough, uh, and I kind of like them. So the way Houston looked could have something to do with Tampa. I think Tampa's a good team, so that'll be a tough game for Seattle, even though it's at home. Whereas I think some of those, and Houston's defense. Look, Seattle's not out of the woods offensively by any means. I mean, they've got to prove a lot more to us before we think that that's going to be anything other than a close game. Look, the Rams were 14-9 on them, right? I think it was
Hmm.
14-9. Was that the Rams score on the Houston? I think it
Yes.
was 14-9, and they're both touchdowns that I think they doubled up. It was the last possession of the first half and the first of the second half. Otherwise, I don't think they scored. So that could be a total dogfight with Houston. I think Houston and Tampa will be tough games for Seattle, regardless. So it's fun to look ahead and say, "Oh, that looks easier. That looks easier." But you're also lost at home to San Francisco,
Hmm.
and that looked easier than it was supposed to. Then we thought that might be a game they win. I think we all thought they might win it. So they still have a lot to prove in terms of the consistency week to week, what they're going to be offensively, um, those things.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And I think there's also no question that toward the end of the year, you're going to look back at that first game and be like, man, that was a killer.
Yeah.
It's not that much different than when they did 20 different crazy things to lose the game to the Rams last year at home. And that ended up being the difference in losing the division. So 100%. I think the main point there is of all these teams, I feel like the Seahawks and 49ers are maybe best set up to have things kind of go their way over the next few weeks. If the Cardinals change that story, then they've got it. They got the Titans. They might have things go their way. And the Rams, I mean, this is kind of a murderer's row part of their schedule. And I look at the Rams schedule overall, and it just seems a lot harder to me. Like I know it's a first place schedule, but you don't see a Ravens team on anyone else's. You've got the Lions, which that's definitely not the
Yeah.
Vikings or the Bears that it was. Uh, you know, so I don't
And then,
know.
like we said, Indies looks better than people thought.
Indy looks
So
better
suddenly
than
that one,
yeah.
there's a couple of those that you could tip towards. Oh, is that team better? I think that's probably the only one I look at their schedule. Jacksonville remains to be seen if they look better. I think their quarterback's inconsistent.
Yeah, what do you
You
think
know,
about Jacksonville? Because that's a wild card for the whole NFC West. Like, who are they going to be this year?
I think they're going to be up and down. I think their quarterback is not consistently accurate, and I think that creates problems for them. So, they've beaten Carolina and lost to Cincinnati when they didn't really, it wasn't like a Joe Burrow shootout there, and they lost the game. So, uh, I don't think Jacksonville's that great.
Mike, other thing I wanted to ask you about the article that came out with Geno Smith and his comments about leaving Seattle and
Hmm.
didn't fit the aesthetic and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I was kind of curious your impression of what's going on with the Raiders, who kind of got stomped by the Chargers, and what you thought of kind of how Geno chose to handle that.
Well, look, I don't think the Raiders are that good. I think we, saw people talk about good Geno, bad Geno, and I think we've seen that in the first two games. So I do think he is better than what they've had. He raises their ceiling for sure, compared to Aiden O'Connell, and he's going to have some big games, but I think he's also going to have some down games. And we saw that. They're not that good of a team around him either. As far as his comments, I mean, um, look, I think him leaving and DK leaving, and even to some extent Tyler Lockett leaving, he's in a different position because he's an older player. But really, we're about a cultural change in Seattle, and I think those guys were very had a great affinity for Pete, and were all in on Pete. And it doesn't mean they don't like Mike McDonald, but it's being run a different way now, and I think those guys were a little bit of casualties of that. Now Geno's goes back a year before that when he wanted the new deal, and they said no, and then he said, "Screw it, I'll only take a really top huge deal from you. I'm not going to if I'm going to take less than that, I'll go somewhere else." I think his was a little bit more acrimonious just through that process, where Seattle was like, "Hey, we like you, but we don't love you."
Yeah, and one more quick thing here is, Seahawks got a lot. John Schneider especially got a ton of criticism this offseason for the move to go
Yeah.
from Geno Smith to Sam Darnold, to move on from DK Metcalf, bring in Cooper Kupp and Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and um, I'm curious, like, based on what you know right now, would you expect that at the end of the season that people are going to look back at that and say, man, the Seahawks are fortunate that those guys wanted to be moved and that the Seahawks made some good moves? Or do you think that it's going to most likely, go back the other direction and people are going to be like, yeah, the Seahawks really, really made some mistakes there?
I think it could be. Look, I don't think the quarterback thing is necessarily going to be the one that people are could look back on. I do want to see what Seattle's weaponry is like over the course of the season, and I think that really depends on Horton and Arroyo, their young guys, developing into what they think they can be. But I don't think that there's a spot for DK on this team. Do you?
No. And
I feel like the moves are. I feel like the moves totally make sense, even if at the end of the year you say they could sure use someone as talented as DK. Don't you agree with that?
well, yeah, and we haven't seen Nicky Manwari, who is one of the guys that essentially came back from the third round pick they acquired from the Steelers to be traded up and draft Nicky Manwari. So, yeah,
I'll say this: the talent of those players is one thing. The fit and where it was at is another. And I think that component of it is something the Seahawks understood more, just knowing their own team and their own where they're at with their new coach, than somebody from afar would say, just looking at it on paper. And I felt like this season they could have used a sure DK Metcalf with a feeling great about being in Seattle and being a not never ever going to be a problem. They could definitely use that. Is that what they were going to get from DK at this stage when
didn't seem
JSN
like it.
may be the number one target?
Hmm.
I don't think so. Now, does that mean I love the Cooper Cup deal? No, no. I we'll see. I think that his fit with what they want to do is good, but where he's at in his career, is it not? It's not going to be a big surprise at all if he misses half the year, right? So it's an imperfect transition, but what they went away from to me kind of made some sense, especially when it comes to DK.
Good stuff as always. Mike Sando of The Athletic. What do you got coming up? Obviously, the Pick Six column. Anything else people should be checking out from you on The Athletic?
Well, I did do a piece that's out there now looking at, you mentioned the Eagles having not only the youngest defense in the league this year, and they were top five oldest 2 years ago, but it's one of the, I believe, five youngest through 2 weeks of a season in the last 25 years out of 800 plus teams.
Wow.
And they're going against the Rams, who have the number one oldest offense in the league with Matthew Stafford and Devontae Adams and Tyler Higbee and Rob Havenstein, those guys. So that's an amazing contrast. And I think there's some nuggets in there, about where these teams are at and the risk that maybe Philadelphia is taking going so young.
Good stuff as always. Mike, hit him straight today, and we will talk again next week.
Thank you.
All right. That is Mike Sando of The Athletic. Good stuff. I mean, I think that this is just I think it's going to be a fascinating season for the NFC West. I think of all the teams, I would say, here's how I would kind of break it down. Let's go which side of the ball for each team has performed better than I thought or worse than I would expect going into the year. 49ers defense is better than I thought. I would even go as far as like run defense is a lot better than I thought. I think the pass rush is pretty good. Bryce Huff being one of the better acquisitions that I expected them to make than they did make. I think that's turning out to be true. I think he's been the best edge rusher opposite of Nick Bosa that they've had in years, maybe ever. And so I think that's been a really positive thing for them. Offensively, I continue to be really impressed by the game that Brock Purdy played against the Seahawks. He pulled that game out of his tail. Like yes, there was mistakes made by Seattle, but they were created by Brock Purdy making something out of nothing because the Seahawks had covered everybody and they had been pressuring him and flushing him out of the pocket. So I think we'll see what happens with his injury and if he's able to stay healthy, but I think he's one of the bigger difference making quarterbacks in the division. We'll get to the other one in a second. I think Christian McCaffrey has been a better receiver than a runner, and they have not been as dynamic of an offense, like from a running perspective, as I would have thought they might be. I think the offensive line, a big question mark now with Connor Colby. That might turn into another diamond in the rough with him. If it is, then they're looking tough. And they, like, all the jokes I made about them being the clear favorites for the division might be coming back to bite me because they do have a schedule that benefits them. So I think overall I'm more bullish on the 49ers than I would like to be relative to the injuries, the suspensions, everything else that they've been facing and how they've played in spite of that. The Cardinals are an interesting one. The Cardinals, people just forget the Cardinals were a top 10 offense last year by most efficiency metrics, but their defense was not. And one of the real issues for them was pass rush. They just couldn't get pass rush. Well, they've improved quite a bit in pass rush, and Baron Browning, who's a guy I really liked for the Broncos for a few years, and the Broncos really thought was going to be one of the better pass rushers in the game. Cardinals traded for him last year before the deadline. He didn't really make much of an impact. They kind of brought him back on a nothing deal, and now he's got like 10 pressures through 2 weeks. And he's valuable. Josh Sweat's good. Calais Campbell is playing really well. And then they've got Dante Stills, who at a defensive tackle has been leading the NFL in run stop rate so far. So there's some really promising things happening on their defensive front for the Cardinals. The secondary we've talked about. The cornerback position is a real question mark. When they get Will Johnson back, I think you feel good about Will Johnson and you feel good about I don't know who else gone. Honestly, Garrett Williams to me was their cornerstone of that cornerback group. He's out for what sounds like the year. That's a massive, massive loss for them. I guess I need to see them play without those guys for a little bit to get a better feel for, is the rush good enough to take pressure off, and the safety play is really good. So anyway, in general, I think the Cardinals defense has made a meaningful jump. That means that their offense doesn't have to be great all the time. Now, they have played the Saints and the Panthers, and they struggled to beat both of them. It might just not be that good of a team. Like, it's very possible that that's the case. Kyler Murray still, when I watched that Arizona Saints game, I was like, the amount of times I was like, God, I'm just glad he's not our quarterback. Like, he makes some special, Houdini plays, and then he also just collapses if anyone gets close to him because he doesn't want to get hit and makes some really poor decisions. I still think Kyler Murray is not any better than he's ever been, and the connection between him and Marvin Harrison Jr. not great. I think the Cardinals receivers are just not producing so far, and I don't think it's going to get easier for them when they play other teams. So overall, like, the Cardinals have my attention because the defense has gotten better and because I think that their schedule can work out for them. But let's face it, I'll go back and give you some of the Cardinal stuff. The Cardinals have the Packers. They play the Packers. They're the only, the Seahawks lucked out in a way that the Vikings were second place and the Packers were third place in that division last year. Because how much would you rather face the Vikings than face the Packers this year? I mean, I don't think it's close. The Cardinals also play at the Cowboys, and the Cowboys are a team that looks, I think, tough. They played the Eagles really well, and they should have won that game if CeeDee Lamb doesn't drop passes. That's a tough game for the Cardinals. And then they've also got at the Bengals at the end of the year. We'll see by then if that's a tough game or not. But their game against the Bucs is at Tampa Bay as opposed to the Seahawks playing Tampa at home. I don't know. They also play at the Texans instead of the Seahawks playing the Texans. So I think the Cardinals schedule feels at this point tougher to me than the Seahawks schedule, which is ironic. You never know coming into these seasons whether you got the first, second, third place, fourth place schedule, which one's going to be actually the hardest to easiest. And then you go to the Rams, and look, the Rams have played, to Mike's point, the Texans at home and at the Titans. And both games were dogfights. The Titans game, they ended up winning 33-19, but it was in question. Like the Titans were up at halftime 13-10. After 3 quarters, it was 20-16 Rams. So it was a flourishing finish in the fourth quarter for the Rams that did it. And here's the thing, though, is the reason I would be wary of the Rams is they go as Matt Stafford goes, and Matt Stafford is playing excellent football. He's playing 2023 level Matt Stafford. So that's one. Two, Devontae Adams looks like exactly who they thought he would be. He and Puka Nacua right now are the best receiving duo in football by advanced numbers. Like if you look at the metrics, those two are performing at a very high rate. Their offensive line, that's the thing I'm curious about. So Alaric Jackson, their left tackle, has not quite been the player he was last year when he kind of broke out. Rob Havenstein, the right tackle, old, had surgeries on both shoulders in the offseason and has not looked great as a pass protector. They already lost Steve Avila and for a little bit. He's still injured. Kevin Dotson has not looked great. Coleman Shelton, the center that they brought back, has not looked great. Now, what they've done well is they've run blocked well. And that has worked. And then Matt Stafford's getting rid of the ball so quickly that the pass protection being not good has not really reared its head yet. So I think the offense for the Rams looks pretty much as good as you could hope it would look, with some question marks about how it will perform against some of these teams with better defenses. Defensively, it's interesting with the Rams. They are, I think, rushing the passer really well, but they're doing it with guys that are not necessarily the guys you'd expect. Like Byron Young has been their difference-making edge rusher more so than Jared Verse. And then let me just pull it up here. I think I've got it here somewhere. If you look at the Rams, the Rams defense and who is creating, not 2024, 2025. That makes sense. All right. Jared Verse has the second most pressures with 7. Kobe Turner has been okay. He hasn't been as dominant as he was, but Josiah Stewart, the rookie that they drafted out of Michigan, undersized guy, but everyone that watches film is like, this guy's a dog. And if there's any undersized edge that's going to make it work in the NFL, it's going to be Josiah Stewart. He looks like he might be a good player, which is bad news for everybody else. So they're getting some stuff there, but remember how they signed Poona Ford and everyone was like, oh, they fixed their run defense. Poona Ford's not like he hasn't been the player this year that he was last year. And I think they put so much pressure on him to be this run defender that hasn't necessarily worked out so far. If I look at, let me look at run defense DVOA for the Rams so far. I'm curious where they are in run defense. The Rams are 18th by DVOA in run defense. And I looked at where they were in I think they're also similarly in EPA per play. They're pretty low. The Rams are 13th. So not terrible. So I'm not sure they've solved their run defense woes, and the Eagles are going to test that out. And then losing Ahkello Witherspoon is huge. He was a big part of how that defense started to really round into form last year because their coverage had been really bad. So losing him is a big deal. They add Trey Brown, who I love Trey. I don't think you can expect him to kind of fix things for them. But they've gotten pretty good play from Nate Landman, the linebacker from Atlanta, has been really good for them. Kobe Durant, who I've always liked as a corner, has been really good for them. And Darius Williams, who's an older player, has been good so far. Like, Darius Williams is, how old is he now? He is 32, almost 33. And I'm just not convinced that he's going to sustain the level of play he's had through 2 weeks. So there's still questions on this defense. But overall, if you look at all these teams and the schedules that they're facing, I mean, like I said, with the Rams, I think the Rams look like maybe the best team so far. At the same time, they've got at Eagles, they've got at the Ravens, they've got home against the Lions. Those are 3 games that are probably tougher than any game on the Seahawks schedule the rest of the way. Like, the toughest game on the Seahawks schedule the rest of the way, maybe it's at the Commanders, but maybe it's not. I don't know yet. Maybe it's at the Falcons. I don't know. Like, it's hard to know if what the Falcons are going to look like by that time of the year in December. But I mean, I know the Bucks are a good team. Maybe that's the toughest game left. It's at home, but they don't have Kalijah Kancey. They don't have Cody Mauch. They don't have Luke Gedeke for that game. Who knows if they'll have Tristan Wirfs. Like, that game is not like an at Eagles or at Ravens or against the Lions kind of game. It's not. So from a schedule standpoint, I'd almost say the Seahawks end up with, let's take a look at the 49ers before I say this, the most advantageous schedule? No, 49ers have the easiest schedule for sure. The toughest game the 49ers have left, I'm setting aside the divisional games, right? They play at the Bucks the week after the Seahawks play the Bucks. They home against the Falcons. They play at the Texans, at the Giants. Like, they play home against the Panthers. Like, everyone plays the Panthers. They play at the Browns. That doesn't look like it's going to be a hard game at all. They play at the Colts. Maybe that ends up being their toughest game, honestly, outside of the division. And then they play home against the Bears. So the 49ers just, it's fair to look at this because they got that win against the Seahawks to start the year. It's just going to be a real pain. That game sucked. That might be enough for them because I just don't know that I see a lot of other teams that are going to be much better than what they've already faced outside of the divisional games. So, yeah, 2 weeks in, we have a lot more to learn, but it's gonna be. I think the biggest question mark about a team like the 49ers, yes, they should be getting some guys back, but are they going to stay healthy? If Christian McCaffrey does go down, Does Brock Purdy stay up? Does Trent Williams end up not being able to stick with it for the rest of the year? I don't know. Those are the things that would give me concern if I was a 49ers fan, which I am not. All right, folks, that will do it for this edition of Hawk Blogger Mornings. If you haven't already downloaded the Sleeper app, come on, do it. You get real-time stats, you get visualizations, you get updates on all your favorite sports teams. The Mariners are playing tonight against the Astros in what's going to be a great 3-game series to decide potentially the division. So follow it all. Download the app, use promo code HAWKS, and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Currently operational in over 25 states. Check out Sleeper today. Make sure you give the show a like and click subscribe. Make sure you go over to hbtix.com. There's over 150 seats available for this Saints game. It's not an expensive. People are selling tickets on there for below face value, $100, $150 below face value. If you want to see the Seahawks play, this is the week to go do it. Go buy tickets, hbtix.com. I take no fees. All you got to do is sign up. The place to go if you're a Seahawks fan to buy tickets from a Seahawks fan and to sell tickets to make sure that you're selling tickets to a Seahawks fan. Let's protect our home field advantage. Use hbtix.com. All right, everybody, I will talk to you tomorrow. Until then, have a great rest of your Friday.